I've always been fascinated by the 1950s. When I learned about it in my 9th grade Cold War history class, I remember how the textbook changed colors from black and white photos of a grim and hostile World War II to colorful photos of a vibrant, flourishing American society. As I learned about the iconic consumerism culture and the nuclear family unit of the 50s, what stood out the most to me were the Levittows, which were acres of suburban land dominated by cookie-cutter houses for American families that sprung up in the 50s. I remember staring at this image in utter disbelief that such a place once existed. To think that living here was once somebody else's normal fascinated me. Time and time again, my research on the 1950s has brought me back to a movie-like, idyllic depiction of happy American families who were living the dream. Think voluminous updos, plaid and polka dot dresses, gloves, hats, and pearls, and a classic red lip for women. Sophisticated tailored blazers with matching dress pants, a fedora hat, fashionable tie, and ultimate chivalry for the men. From shiny cars, to retro diners, to well-manicured lawns, to sprawling suburbs, life in the 50s sounded like an absolute dream. People were spending and buying, the economy was booming, a record number of people were having children and getting married. Those same people flocked to the suburbs to purchase their first ever Levittown homes and start up their families. People wanted to leave behind memories of World War II and start afresh. The best way to describe it all is that life was good. It's no wonder it was called the fabulous 50s. But here's where we're going to burst your bubble. The 50s were glorious but gilded. The perception of the era is stability and prosperity. There's so much missing from this narrative. Notably, the 50s was characterized by pervasive fear of communism infiltration. Senator Joseph McCarthy, coupled with the House of Un-American Activities, carried out extensive hunts for communism-sympathizing imposters in the government and in Hollywood. These hunts often involved publicizing the accusations of other people, often with insufficient evidence. Regardless of how accurate McCarthy's tactics were, they were effective. In a period better known as the Red Scare, McCarthyism instilled profound fear that anyone, even your own government officials, your friends, your neighbors, could be a potential communist. Anybody who dared to criticize the government was at risk of being labeled a potential communist, an opposer to American democracy, and ostracized from society. And so, of course, to avoid such accusations, Americans found solace in conformity, where everybody's roles in society were clearly defined, and nobody felt empowered to challenge the status quo. These events reveal to us the immense American insecurity and paranoia that lies beneath the facade of the 50s. So, in addition, you cannot talk about the 50s without talking about racism and inequalities against African Americans. Even with the revolutionary case of Brown versus Board of Education, it made it unconstitutional for states to segregate schools. The reality was still perilous for African American children hoping to attend them. Events like Little Rock, where 9 black students had to be escorted to school by federal troops after facing countless death threats and unnerving racism, spotlights the violent pushback they received just to attend school, something we take for granted today. The Levittowns that we looked at earlier were exclusively for white people, as were most safe, centrally located, and well-maintained neighborhoods of the time. Redlining, which was racism and discrimination in housing, was a brutal reality for African American families. And of course, everything has a domino effect. The district you live in dictates the quality education you receive, the jobs available to you, and ultimately, the resources at your disposal. During the 50s, this American dream, the American ideal, this American life that everybody was chasing was nothing but an empty promise for thousands of black Americans. Now, given the history of McCarthyism and racism, we have come to learn that the idyllic facade of the 50s was flawed, which is why context matters. Especially when you're thinking about matters related to history, it's really important to dig deeper than what you see on the surface, in your textbook, or in film, because it's the context that gives history true significance and accuracy. We must put events into perspective in order to enrich our understanding of a time period and shed light on overlooked stories and underrepresented voices. Now, I want you to apply this idea of contextualization to your own peers. People are a mosaic of stories, identities, and experiences that make them the unique person they are today. You, and I suppose I'm speaking to the teenagers in this room, are so much more than just a student. You may share the same role as just a student as the person sitting next to you, but you've got so much. Friends, values, cultures, interests that make you undefinable. Your teacher or your coach is so much more than just your teacher or your coach. They've got families and pursuits of their own that make them unique and that are really important to them, and you might not know about. Your parents are more than just your parents, and this is what I struggle with myself. Your parents had a whole life before you, but because they're your parents every single day, that's their role in your life, it's really easy to forget about their other identities or experiences that don't revolve around you. To help make sense of it, I'm going to share a little anecdote about my own family. My father was an immigrant from China, and one thing about him is that he is the hardest worker I know. Since the day he stepped foot in America empty-handed, he never stopped working hard to provide for my family. His immense devotion to his work, however, often left little time to get to know and spend with his own children. And soon enough, when my brother moved off to college and I moved away to boarding school, our time as a 4-person family living under one roof was up. Growing up, I deeply respected his work ethic, but I resented what it did to my family. There were so many times I felt so alone without the emotional support and presence of my father, and all I wished for is that my 4-person family could operate the way a 4-person family should. When my parents filed for divorce, I asked my mom why she was hesitating. She told me that she had 20+ years of feelings for my father that don't just go away in an instant. Just sign the damn papers, that was my mindset. After all, I never felt like I had a deep emotional connection to my father, so I didn't see the need in trying to preserve this 4-person family unit she prized so much. But what I've come to understand is that there's so much more to the delicate dynamic of a family than I initially thought. That's her person. She's been married to my father longer than I've been alive on this planet, and they shared decades of memories together before my brother or I came into the picture. And thus, I do not understand the depth and the magnitude of her emotional connection to him. When I gave my input initially, I did so solely on the basis of self-interest, never taking into account the fact that she's not just my mother, but she's a wife to my father as well. Those are 2 different identities that she wears. Her identity as a wife and as a life partner is just as significant as her identity as a mother. And this has been a crucial realization that's helped me process my parents' divorce. Through this experience, I've learned the importance of contextualization and how it makes you more empathetic to the people around you when you truly take the time to understand their other identities and experiences that play a role in the decisions and the choices they make. People are so much more than just one prescribed role in society. So I encourage you to contextualize people more often, and I think you'll find it eye-opening to see others in more than one dimension. There's more than what meets the eye, and this is true for both people and also world events. When we look back on the 1950s, America put on a new costume and underwent a role change of sorts. In the latter half of the 50s, America experienced a rise in rock and roll that was corresponded to a greater movement for freedom of expression. Brand new ideas of freedom and even rebellion appealed to young people. Parents were worried that figures like Elvis Presley and James Dean would pull their children away from the safety and conformity of the previous era. The era that followed was characterized by a countercultural revolution dominated by the hippies of the 60s, who preached love, anti-war, nonviolence, music, freedom, intimacy with your own feelings. And they were really revolutionary because they moved away from the rigidity of the previous era. The dawn of the 60s brought change that was necessary and inevitable. It also teaches us that long-term conformity is not sustainable for a society that's constantly evolving like ours. And we too, as humans, are constantly evolving with the world around us. More frequently than we can process, we experience changing technology, relationships, and preferences. As you grow older, your ability to communicate, your ability to adapt, and your ability to engage in teamwork all change. Life will throw you for a curveball, and you full of highs, lows, and in-betweens. You're going to make new friends, which is exciting. And you're going to lose some old ones, which is bittersweet. You're going to discover new hobbies, talents, and passions that you didn't know you had in you. And those are going to come and go as well. Some weeks you feel like you have the whole world on your shoulders, and others you feel restored, relaxed, and rejuvenated. The same people who were once your everything now cause you indescribable pain. This is the ebb and flow of life itself. And so, in order to navigate the shifts and rifts in life, I'm going to offer you one core piece of advice. Change your expectations, standards, and goals according to the natural instability and evolution of life itself. Ask yourself, what did success look like to you then? What does success look like to you now? What did happiness look like to you then? What does happiness look like to you now? What mattered to you then, and what matters to you now? Your answers to these questions should change over time because you're going to grow. If you're going through a low in your life and you can only give 60%, don't get down on yourself when you can't perform to the same capacity as if you were feeling 100% your best. This happens a lot to me in cross country, actually. My sophomore year, I was consistently improving my times, and I took races relatively seriously. I was new to my school at the time, so succeeding athletically gave me a lot of validation. Fast forward to junior year now, my priorities have completely shifted and my academic workload has tripled. Yet, I often criticize myself for not being able to run as fast as I could last year, when I should have focused on the fact that my priorities were different, and I was also juggling so many other responsibilities and tasks at the time. As humans, we always want to do the most, do the best, and do that all the time. The reality is, you can't do that, and you have to know your priorities and know your limits. Your priorities are always changing, aren't they? Because you're growing. And so your goals have to change along with that. The goal that I set for myself in junior year of running as fast as I could in sophomore year was not healthy. It wasn't attainable, given the amount of new things that I added to my plate. And so I hope I've learned my lesson for next year. And I plan to stay open-minded that my priorities are probably going to change from now until senior fall. And I plan on setting a new running goal for myself accordingly. In this talk, I hope I've given you some insight on how the 50s can be a window into your own life. Enrich your life through contextualization and adaptation. Keep asking questions and digging deeper to acquire a more comprehensive understanding and greater empathy for those around you and their histories. Tailor your goals and standards to align with the inherent evolution and pace of life itself. But there's still so much to be learned about such an odd decade in America's history. Continually asking questions will unveil hidden lessons of their past and their meaning to us today. So let's continue to explore, question, and learn from the rich tapestry of history as we navigate our lives forward. Thank you.